Welcome to Focus on Why. I'm Amy Rowlandson, your host. Join me to explore the compelling stories, profound insights, and captivating experiences shared by my guests from all over the world. Focusing on the importance of why, these relatable, uplifting, and inspiring conversations will empower, motivate, and guide you to create your own purposeful way of life. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we start, have you signed up to receive my weekly email newsletter, Friday Focus? Every Friday, I focus on one topic with one action arising. The link to sign up is in the show notes. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Hannah Roberts. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a real pleasure. So thank you for that, Amy.
And should I be calling you Dr. Hannah Roberts?
No, I always joke and say I'm not the useful kind of doctor, but I've had to stop myself making that joke because it kind of downgrades what you have achieved. But no, please don't call me doctor.
Tell me more.
So I have a PhD in, oh my goodness, organometallic chemistry. So I used to look at how metals interact with organic materials to look into systems essentially that go into quantum computing to make the fastest possible version of electronics and things like that. Now we're dredging up things from a very long time ago, which is why I say, and in today's society, useful, but the research no doubt has moved on slightly in the last decade for sure.
So, when I ask a question and I think, was that the right question to ask? And it always is, because if I had tried to imagine or think of what your doctorate was in, that would not have been my first go-to answer.
I'm not sure it should have been my first go-to doctorate either, but it is what happened.
So what is it that you're focusing on now, Hannah?
So right now I am coaching STEM women, so science, technology, engineering, and maths, to really figure out what's next in their career intentionally, and give them all the strategies and the how-tos to make that happen.
And you put the stress on the intentionally there in that. Tell me more about that.
I actually, a couple of years ago, I was trying to figure out what was really at the crux of the methodology that I had developed to work with my clients. And one of my clients said, what I really wanted was intentionality in my career. And it's a word that really stuck with me because in our careers, lots of people have these careers where we actively step onto something, but then it just sort of naturally unfolds in front of you and that next opportunity presents itself to you. And before long, you haven't actually made any intentional choices in your career for quite some time. And it's about regaining that intentionality. And I suppose this feeds into your kind of podcast as well. It's redefining what success really means to you and being able to focus intentionally on that version of what success means to you today, not like 20 years ago.
And from my perspective, what I'm hearing is this intentionality of what sort of naturally unfolds in terms of what becomes available to you in this STEM industry that you're working in, as opposed to what actually you really would like. So that's the difference that you're making there, yeah?
Exactly. And for some people, that may be a continuation in the STEM field. And for others, it might look like setting up their own yoga studio or something completely different. It's whatever is the unfolding within you that's happening.
And why STEM women?
Well, I'm sure given the first question that you asked me, you'll know that my background is in STEM, so science, tech, engineering, and maths. I think it became quite meaningful for me. I suppose I should backtrack to when I first started my degree. So when we first started chemistry, 47% of the undergraduates were women. So I didn't even notice there was something called a leaky pipeline of women till I got to the last year of my PhD. We just got married and we were thinking about starting to have a family. So I did this kind of mental couple of steps ahead planning thing. And I discovered that in a department of over 200 people, only 5 of those were women. And of those 5 women, only 2 had young children. So that kind of left me questioning, is this even possible for me? But I was on that career conveyor belt and I didn't know what else I was going to do. So I just took that next step forwards. And a colleague recommended me for a postdoc position, which is kind of the next stage in an academic career post PhD. And although I showed up for that interview, although it was my CV and credentials, I felt like I only really got that position because of my contact rather than something I actually did to deserve it. So as soon as I started in that position, in academia, we have sort of short-term contracts. So this is a 12-month contract. 2 weeks in, I fell pregnant with my first child. And so I had that, I really got to make myself indispensable so that I even have a job to go back to. So I said yes to everything, became that go-to person to get things done. And I stepped into what me and you call superwoman mode, spinning so many plates, it actually felt really impossible to put them down because I thought everything was going to crash down around me. So just before I went on mat leave, obviously being superwoman has its advantages because you get stuff done and people notice that. So I did get my contract extended. And just before I went on mat leave, I was offered a series of advice from people. So one person said, I came back to university 2 weeks after giving birth and I just got a nanny. And then someone else said, oh, well, I wrote my fellowship, which is the next stage beyond postdoc, in the first 12 weeks after giving birth. They don't do much for the first 12 weeks. And someone else said, look, make it look like maternity leave never happened on your CV. So what I really took from that was, you should be doing something with this mat leave. So 2 days, or maybe it was 3 days after giving birth, I'd had a 1 liter hemorrhage. I was actually green under the eyes. I had Oscar in the Moses basket and I was typing away to these project partners across Europe. And I was in all the budgets and all the detail, and it was just completely madness. But I felt like at that time in my life, I didn't have a choice. And I think this is the point that I'm getting around supporting STEM women. There are so many barriers that all coincide at the same time. So first of all, you've got a very male-dominated environment. Only 8% of women are professors in chemistry, but we've got 43% or more going in to the degree. So there's a massive leaky pipeline that happens. So we don't have many role models. As I said, you start to look around and go, oh, questioning, is it possible for me? There is, for those of us like me whose parents didn't go to university, we don't have that insider knowledge of what we should be focusing on. So sometimes opportunities that we should have been maybe focused on or creating, we didn't realize we needed till after the situation or the opportunity has passed us in terms of timing. And then you've got this coalescence if you are looking to start a family. And I know that that's not for everybody, or sometimes not an option for everybody, but it does coalesce at that time where you're trying to get to independence in that career. And it becomes really difficult and challenging unless you're willing to work full time. And so with all these things, like this melee of situations, I really wanted to help and support other women on that pathway to have a smoother time of it, but also to have this this understanding that actually it is a pipeline, and 90% of women will need, not women, but 90% of postdocs in general will need to move beyond academia because it just simply isn't the pipeline. And so my work has evolved over the years, and I do work with academics to help them thrive rather than just survive in that environment so that there's more role models in place for those coming through. But I now also work quite heavily with those people who moved beyond academia and found that, this is actually the world over. If I go in corporate, I'm also coming up against the same kind of barriers as well, no matter where I am. So my work has evolved like sort of in both of those different directions over the last few years in general.
And I want to pick up on this importance of the advice that you received, the series of advice, as you said, that you were offered, although it didn't sound like it was very much an offering. It was more like this is the way it's done, make sure you do that the same way kind of thing. The importance of role models here, full stop. And the fact that you shared that you didn't necessarily have the role models going into university, so you didn't know what opportunities were available or what to focus on, even if they came, and that you might have missed some. What is your opinion or thought around how role models can be the trailblazers in this space?
I think it's really important. And I had my own personal experience of this actually as I came back from it's my second mat leave. I was the first person in our building, in a whole building, to ever have a baby while working at the university. So everything was new for everybody. No one knew what paperwork was supposed to be done and keeping in touch days and all this kind of other stuff. But I had a professor who said, you opened up the floodgates and now there are 5 women who are having, like, as if it was such a bad thing. But actually, I discovered that it's really important to open those gateways, because when you do, actually, it opens not just a gateway, but a floodgate of opportunity for those people who perhaps were holding back or didn't think it was possible to actually go, I can see a pathway, I can see it's possible and it works, and therefore I can do it too. I know sometimes people have to be the trailblazers to make those opportunities, but then once they do, it widens that opportunity gate so much further. And I know for myself, I had a pregnant postdoc that came into my office to sort of ask advice about how they should do things, how long they should be off on maternity leave, all the kind of different processes. And I realized that actually I couldn't turn around to her and say, do what I did, because I was ashamed of the way in which I'd operated, to continue to work all the way through mat leave and just keep all the projects for fear that I wouldn't have a job to go back to. And that's when I really understood that it's not just me looking ahead for role models. People are also looking at what you're doing all the time too. And so we have to operate in this way that we're proud of and that we're happy for other people to emulate. And if that isn't currently happening for yourself, then I think sometimes we need to look at ourselves as role models as well as other people.
Yeah, I love that. And this leaky pipeline that you spoke of, and recognition that you were only 5 women out of 200, and of those, only 2 had children. This 1%, is that representative across the field still, or has that changed in any way?
Um, it's hard to know because it's actually also country dependent. So I found that when you look at the policies that a country has, it determines a different outcome for people. So when I speak to those in Scandinavian countries in particular, half of the PhD students in the lab who are at childbearing age and are women will have children, whereas it's almost unheard of pretty much in a UK-based system, because as you'll be aware, we don't actually have very good systems around childcare and maternity support. So I think it actually comes back down to, at some degree, a wider context of the country's personal policies and practices as well.
And we're talking about this, and as you did caveat at the beginning, those that want to or can, this is an option to have children and still keep your career. For those who are not involved in having that decision for whatever reason, what is it that is keeping them intentional in staying in or opting out of the STEM areas?
I think the STEM fields can be quite a hostile environment if you have a very male dominated environment. If you are the only woman in a room trying to get heard, it can be quite intimidating at times. And largely you end up feeling like an imposter by default. And so the natural course of action for someone is to alleviate that discomfort by finding something completely different where they do feel welcomed and they do feel accepted. And so you will largely see a lot of people leave to go and do something completely different, or to be in an environment that's much more welcoming.
And what's the impact of losing women in STEM?
I mean, it's huge. It's not just when I look at the statistics of it, when you look at any STEM field in comparison to the same level in any other kind of environment that isn't STEM. So you'll have 1 in 4 C-suite leaders in any other industry are women, but in STEM it's 1 in 8. And we all have the same set of circumstances in the culture within which you live or the work that you're doing. So there's something very unique about STEM that's really blocking women along those pathways.
And historically, I mean, when you look at history, there have been women in this field for centuries.
Oh,
You know,
yes.
obviously there have been challenges and not recognized in many ways or celebrated in the ways that they should be. But this is not a new story.
It's not a new story, but actually it's really interesting because I was speaking to someone the other week about the film Oppenheimer. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Yes. Amazing film, right? And I was watching the film and I was like, oh, look, there was no women in the labs back then. Like, oh, that's just like typical. And I spoke to someone and they were like, no, there was actually not tons, but there were women, but the filmmakers have chosen not to include women in the picture, even though they were there. So even in the present day, when we have the opportunity to be inclusive, we're not.
That's so interesting. And whether that's an oversight or whether that's deliberate, who knows?
The only roles they gave women in that film were those of support cast sexual partners.
Yeah.
And it actually makes me angry when I think you've missed a huge part of the story and opportunity there to really showcase people at their best.
Yeah. What was the series that's recently been on Netflix, which is the brilliant one about the chemist?
Lessons in chemistry.
Tell me what you loved about that.
There was so much in that book that I really resonated with in terms of that book was set in, was it like 1956? I can't remember now. It was a good couple of decades ago. But I still resonated with her experience of being in the lab at that time and thinking, oh, I'm not sure we've moved on so much then, but I loved the way that she empowered so many other people around her to be engaged in science and to utilize science and to become more confident in their own abilities as a result. So I loved it.
Your work, Hannah, is really reminding me of a previous guest who is Caroline Flanagan, and she champions Black lawyers to recognise that they're not the only Black lawyer in the room, they're the first. And that reframe of being the trailblazer, with it comes a level of responsibility, but also an enormous amount of empowerment. And I'm hearing this echoed in your field, in what you're doing in your work, in this trailblazing but empowerment of others, to be the role model for others, but also to be the role model for yourself and for essentially your own children, because you are showing what is possible and you are walking that truth, opening up those gateways, as you said, the floodgates, let's go, that of opportunity, but showing what's possible. What is it that you would like to achieve and what do you believe is possible?
I have a big picture vision. So what I'm really shooting for here is a world where every single member of society is valued equally for their contribution and everyone is respected. That sounds really big, right? We're going full all out there. So I've kind of distilled that back into what's my life's mission, because whether or not we achieve that in my lifetime is debatable. So my life's mission really is to see and create opportunity for that wholeness. And I've paired that back into, okay, this chapter mission in the next 5 years is around coaching STEM women to figure out what's next. So that kind of just that starting point on that pathway. And for me, it's the intersection of two global goals for sustainable development. So I'm really looking at the intersection between goal number 5, which is gender equity, and goal number 8, which is decent work and economic growth, which sounds like, oh, you just hear about making money. But for me, the intersection actually means is being able to help women be more intentional in their careers so that they can step up and have the bandwidth to be in positions of leadership so that they can help make the choices at the table where it's actually happening, to be able to think about the impact that's going to have on all members of society, not just a subset of society, and the ripple effect that will have in society, but also them being in leadership positions, allowing that ripple effect to allow others to know that it's possible and do that too. So that's my version.
And it's so interesting because when you look at the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, it's hard to say, well, that one is more important than that one. They're all equally of value and they're all needed. How did you really hone in to just choosing those two and then understanding the intersection between them?
Like you said, they are all important and all needed. And for me personally, I did an exercise where I looked at, if I was to pick one of these global goals for my head that makes sense based on what I've done so far in my life, and I picked one for my heart, what do I actually really care about enacting change the most in the world? And then I did, if I put both of those together and I look at the overlap, like a lovely mathematical Venn diagram, at the intersection between the two, what is it that I personally see in that crossover? And when I'm working with my clients around their vision, this is the exact exercise that I do with them. And largely they come up with completely different intersections than I do, but it's meaningful to them. And what it does is it helps set that this is where we're heading, this is what we're shooting for in particular. And then it drops out, well, what kind of organizations actually align to that vision? Does the organization I work in actually align to my personal vision? Is there a crossover between the two? If there's not, it helps people realize that they might have a disconnected vision with their workplace and an opportunity for a pivot point in their career, a chance for additional alignment overall. Or you could be a person like me who just makes up their own job so that I can have full overlap between the two so that I can really feel completely fulfilled and happy with what I'm doing as well.
And this meaning and fulfillment that you've just spoken about, and this head and heart exercise, does it come naturally to you as a scientist to tap into this more creative and uh, almost something that is intangible space?
I think scientists have been doing this since the dawn of time, being able to hold the space between this visioning, this creativity, this burst of inspiration and idea, and then the logical, how can I, one, prove it, and how can I go about trying to disprove it to see if it is, in fact, actually real and tangible and a stepwise move forward in some kind of direction. So I think scientists have been able to hold this tension for a very long time.
And it was a loaded question in that essence that, there is this sort of divide between the creativity sometimes and the science element, and particularly in school. I mean, we see it all the time that there's more emphasis on the maths and the versus the creative and the sort of exploration, but science is just as much exploration as the creativity, and it just seems to me to be a shame. I mean, we talk about sort of Sir Ken Robinson and having this whole creative element that he spoke about in his fabulous TED talk, and being able to tap into that space. How does that affect your parenting in what you're choosing to do with your children?
Goodness, what a question. So, for context, I have three children. I have a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a nearly 7-year-old, because in 3 weeks she's going to be 7. And I would say I'm actually trying to give them the opportunity to try out lots of different things, whether that is arts or whether it's in sports or whether it's in interests and topics, because I think it's that wide variety of activity that helps them to be able to say, I want more of this type of thing and less of this, or I want to try this out and I like it for 6 weeks and then I want something else. But I want to just offer them as many opportunities as I can give them to explore, whether that's in science or something else.
And in terms of you spoke earlier about this huge impact of losing women in STEM and the the process that sometimes we can go through in that environment of it being quite hostile, and sometimes we experience imposter phenomenon or syndrome, whatever you want to label that, but to be welcomed, to be accepted in the society that your vision is creating, this incredible space where you have an opportunity where every member of society is valued and respected for their contribution. This vision, will it be your lifetime, your children's lifetime, their children's lifetime?
Oh, what a question. It's impossible for us to know, right? Because sometimes it feels like we're making really big progress in a particular area, and then there can be something like a pandemic that comes out of left field. Maybe it wasn't so left field. We've been having pandemics and epidemics since the dawn of time. But there's things like that that actually then caused gender equity to travel backwards rather than forwards by a good chunk of time, something like 50 years. It went from something like 100 years to gender equity or gender parity to 150. So for me, it's impossible because it depends upon what actually happens in the world in that kind of context between now and however long I'm on this planet for and beyond. So I would love to say that it would happen in my lifetime, but realistically, all we can ever do with these visions are to move towards them. And the more that we move towards them, the closer and closer we get to our personal kind of bliss around it. But I have zero expectations on what the outcome of that will be, just movement towards.
And this movement towards, you just described it as personal bliss. What might others call that?
Crazy. I think there's a few things around work, right? If work isn't fun, then perhaps we're not doing it quite right. I also think there's an alignment of stepping into your natural talents to feel blissful as well. So when we do step into our natural talents rather than what we've just been learned how to be good at, as I call the capability trap, when we step fully into our talents and then we know what they are, we can then spend time investing in getting to that mastery level. And when we really get to that mastery level, that provides that blissful moment as well. And then there's the set of career values, what's actually going to make us happy and fulfilled in our work as well. And trying to get more of what we're looking for out of our positions. But also, if we are to move beyond that into another organization, how do I get more of what actually makes me happy rather than less overall? So there's lots of different criteria we can use to make those impactful pivot points, as I call them.
And the career values you just referenced, how different, if at all, are they to your personal values?
I would say that they are different. There are elements of one that always shows up between the two is that making a difference definitely appears in both sides, but largely the rest are, I would say, quite different.
And which ones do you kind of use on your daily basis to make your choices and decisions?
Ooh, good question. When we're thinking about career values, so those are the set of criteria that will make us happy and fulfilled. I suggest that if they appear in the top 5, for example, that we're more likely to actually be spending some sort of time, energy, or attention on them. If they're more at the bottom of the list, they're probably something that we're not quite so engaged with, for example. But for sure, like right at the top of the list is going to be making a difference, making an impact. So I'm filtering for choices through that. But one of the biggest reasons that I went into my own business in the first place was for that autonomy. I don't want to say I'm a control freak, but for the autonomy, the flexibility, so that when it is Christmas play, when it is Harvest Festival, I can be there and I don't have to worry about that, justify that. It's something where I can integrate all of the different areas of my life and find it's not just fulfillment in work, it's fulfillment in all areas of life. And swimming too, for goodness sake. I enjoy lots of things for myself beyond my children as well.
Yeah, I love that. And this whole filtering that's going on, at what point did that become for you intentional versus the, right, as we started at the beginning, that sort of just unfolding?
I think we need to have moments of reflection because it would be impossible to run through my checklist every single day and go through all of that conscious effort. I think it's something that needs checking in at once you've done the whole piece of work on it, at least once or twice, ideally every quarter, but every so often to have a little check in with yourself. Is what I think's happening actually the reality of the situation? And then if it's not, I get to make some conscious choices around that. But largely, I would let things unfold for at least, 12 weeks before having a check in.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? That the amount of personal work that I'm hearing that you have done to get yourself to a point now where you're confident and connected to who you are and who you are continuing to be, and where that's evolving. It takes work to get to this point, and it's the understanding of, as you said, challenging the status quo beforehand, looking at it and going, this doesn't have to be like this. I don't have to be sitting during my maternity leave, literally on the computer and making myself ill. And that whole superwoman version that is useful at some points for very short amounts of times, but is not sustainable. Hearing where you are now and that evolution, again, it's so great to see. And it's what you're championing, this ability to assess and to move on and be intentional. Share with me the best way that people could get in contact with you, Hannah, because I'm sure people will want to say, I need to have a conversation about where I am in my career right now.
Oh, thank you, Amy. I think the best way is to connect with me on LinkedIn, Hannah Roberts or Hannah Roberts Coaching, whichever one you want to type in.
Brilliant. And what I've really taken from this is what's possible, what's existing right now, and unfortunately how the pandemic has set this whole vision for you, backwards. And well, for everyone, for all women, it's set it backwards. But know that there is a huge amount of hope and possibility, but it's going to take personal responsibility and action for that to shift. It's not going to happen overnight. It is for women to take that action. And as I just said, you've just given them a way of reaching out to you to do that. Thank you for sharing your journey, where you are to now, and what your vision is for the future. And it's been so, I want to say empowering, but it doesn't feel like quite, that doesn't seem the right word. I want to feel like it's illuminating is the word. I think it's just bringing it to the center of the focus, and that has been really important for this conversation to come onto the podcast, to talk about the focus on why it's important, to give it that spotlight. Hannah, thank you. Have you got some final words, please, for the listener?
Oh, I do actually. Thank you. And thank you for that illumination. I was running a 1-day event, a 1-day retreat called Liberate, Set Yourself Free. And we were doing an alignment check on people's purpose, mission, vision. So I know your podcast is all about focusing on why and purpose. And for me, purpose lies in the past. It's where our passions arose from. The mission's in the present, where we get our personal power from, and we can change our mission anytime. And the vision is the out there in the future, what we care about, enacting change the most in the world. And when we did this exercise on purpose, I think sometimes purpose can get quite elongated and complicated. And I said, let's just make it super simple. What is the lesson that you need to learn to set yourself free? And we talked about, if you want to feel respected, we first learn how to respect ourselves. If you want to feel loved, we first have to learn how to love ourselves. If we want to trust other people, we first have to learn how to trust in ourselves. So my question to your listeners would be, What is the lesson you need to learn to set yourself free?
What value have you gained from tuning into Focus on Why today? What are your reflections with actions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or via LinkedIn and share how Focus on Why has made a difference to you. Your feedback not only will inspire others, but will help them to discover how Focus on Why has created powerful ripple effects. Let's continue the conversation. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or X, join the Focus on Why Facebook group, and sign up for my weekly newsletter, Friday Focus, to keep in touch. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.